Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Set a Watch Sword of the Coin from Rock Manor Games. This is just a slipcase over here, but that's because the box is currently being used on the table as part of the actual game as we play through it. But Set a Watch is a 1 to 4 player game. Technically speaking, I highly recommend it at solo, slightly at 2 players, and not really at all at 3 and 4, really mostly solo. But with that said, this is a 1 to 4 player game in which you'll be trying to survive across a horde of incoming enemies, wave after wave, turn after turn, as you slowly take turns with your 4 adventurers, taking turns monitoring the campsite, and having your other adventurers handle the line of enemies until they can take them down, while you slowly go through a sequence of various locations in the game until you eventually either win or lose as you go through it. Now, the general sequence that I said already is you're going to have these rounds. You're going to have a team member who has to be left at the campsite to take a variety of campsite actions. You're going to dictate which member's there. You're going to use their token to mark whether they're going there for the first time, whether they're going there for the second time, so you can slowly mark across the rounds of play that they have each been to the campsite twice. Now, going to the campsite is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a little bit of grunt work as you try to chop some firewood and maintain the campfire so you can be sure to see as many enemies as possible as they attack, but also there's some other fun things that are going along the way, including activating your adventurer's unique abilities, which especially in the case of the monk can be used to power up his dice, which is why, at least for myself, if I'm playing with the monk, he's always the first person I send to the campfire. But we're starting to dive into strategy as opposed to how to play. But past that, you're going to send an adventurer to the campfire. That adventurer is going to allocate their dice to the campfire, and strictly speaking, you roll your dice first, so you do have some degree of agency over seeing what the adventurers rolled before deciding which adventurer will go to the campfire. You'll have different locations as far as what you can do over here, as well as locations of how you can earn coins. This is a good time to mention that Sword of the Coin is the second of, I believe, a 3-part series in the Set a Watch universe, and Sword of the Coin introduces a few small tweaks, but the main thing going to be those coins we talk about. As you go to various locations in the campfire, you can do different things. You can check the map and go to different locations in the game. You can equip different things, equip different gear over here. You can also go ahead and you can equip different spells in the game. Not really spells so much as abilities. Each character has 3 different abilities they're going to start with, but those 3 abilities are really from a potential pool of 5. So when you have a character over here, so for example, if that monk went to the campfire, where's my monk, we can choose Perfect Defense or Flying Kick instead of their other 3 abilities. Basically, you'll start with 3 random abilities, but you have the opportunity to fully customize your character to the build that you want them to have from their 5 initial abilities. You'll also be able to go to heal over here, as well as scouting ahead in the locations and chopping firewood, which is how you're going to slowly move this fire tracker higher up so you can eventually see more enemies as they come towards you. If you have at least 1, you can see 1 enemy, then 2, then 3. You're trying to stay above these tracks so that when you have these enemies in front of you, you can actually see what you're dealing with and react accordingly rather than wandering blindly into the night. And then lastly, like I mentioned already, you can also assign a die to their personal ability where you can do different things. In the case of the monk, they can upgrade a single die twice or 2 of their dice once. So for example, they can go ahead and upgrade one of these directly to one of their stronger, more powerful dice so they have a higher chance of rolling high numbers when they are out there attacking in the field. When you're done with that, you're going to go to actually defeating the enemies. You'll have your other your other 3 characters in the game. By the way, the game does come with 6 characters. You're going to have 4 different ones, and even those 4 different ones have, like I said already, 3 of their 5 abilities, giving you a decent combination of what you possibly will be starting the game with as you wander out into the night. That's not to mention the various unhallowed. Those are the stronger enemies you're fighting against, as well as the general enemies. A whole lot of variety to the experience. That's even with just this one base set. Forget diving into, the original or the 3rd one coming out. But you're going to start assigning your dice to these various enemies to take them down. And there's a few ways you can do that. You can simply look at their health and try to assign that much value to kill them, but far more often and far more fun, you're going to be looking at your abilities and using your abilities and or assigning dice to your abilities. You see, abilities can be used in 2 ways. You can either assign a die there, or you can exhaust that ability, where you'll have to potentially have to rest it to get it back to, be able to use it when you go back to the campfire over here. And so you have those opportunities as far as using dice to actually attack, using dice to activate abilities, or exhausting abilities to activate them again to get that final punch in to take down an enemy. Because you have to slowly take down this entire row. All these enemies will have attack, they'll have health, they'll have ongoing abilities or reveal abilities when you first reveal them. They have a bunch of abilities, a bunch of things, and a lot going on as far as how much is, as far as what you have to do to manage taking them out while staying as alive as possible along the way. Each of the characters brings their own set of theme to the game, different things that they do. The monk's going to be slowly powering up and dealing with a lot of damage from their cards. You're going to have the artificer who has their own little staff over here. You have the barbarian who has to exhaust their abilities instead of assigning dice to them, but their abilities can be incredibly powerful. You have the witch who has this familiar they can utilize, as well as a lot of manipulation over here, and then we have two other characters on the side over there, all of them bringing their own flavor to them. That's in combination with the large pool of potential locations you have to go through the game. We have the Adventurers Guild right now. Adventurers may spend a number of coins equal to a creature's damage to defeat that creature, and this is going to define how many enemies there are, as well as how much you lower the campfire as you reveal a new location. So when you're trying to chop wood and keep that campfire alive, you are doing so both to improve the campfire, but also to stop it from getting worse because of the slow progression through the journey. That's basically what's going on there. There's also going to be this merchant board, which is where you spend your coins to get a bunch of abilities, so you can have these abilities you can use for your characters, but ultimately it comes down to taking down a row of characters. A row of characters that is going to constantly challenge you. You're also going to have the unhallowed, these stronger enemies that again are going to challenge you as you go through it. And the whole balance of the game is trying to figure out how much is maintenance, how much is you trying to use your skills, use your abilities to just keep pace with the enemies, and when do you need to exhaust yourself a little further, exhaust an ability here or there, to get that extra punch needed, but knowing it might weaken you a little too much down the road if you're not careful as you go through it. That is basically how you play Set a Watch. A few small details we're not necessarily getting into as far as maintenance, the exact steps. We're definitely not getting into setup. Setup is it's a mess. We're going to talk about that shortly. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into the review, starting off with ease of play. The core rulebook is actually fairly easy to understand and go through. The core sequence of play is fairly easy to understand and get into. The part that I find tedious and annoying every single time is setup. Setup, I find, is a step-by-step process of separating all the cards out exactly how you need them and doing a whole bunch of card counting and setting up piles. It is not the worst, don't get me wrong, it is not the worst at all. But for a game of this weight and for a game that's doing what this game is doing, it feels like the setup is disproportionately frustrating compared to, well, a game of this weight. Past that, the game doesn't run that long, although it does depend. If you're playing with 2 players, it can certainly drag, or 3 or 4, it can drag out longer. For myself, I primarily play this solo, and at solo, I'd say it tends to run around 45 minutes. It can drag a little bit, especially if you're being a little bit more AP prone, taking your time with those decisions, but generally I'd say around 45 minutes for a solo game. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, there's a lot to like here, although nitpicks and critiques as well. First of all and foremost, there's powers and abilities and characters and variety to the experience galore. This is a game that you're going to have 6 different characters. You're only choosing 4 from those 6, and again, that assumes just this game. It does not even count in the base game, expansions, whatever it is. And so to that end, you're going to have a lot of combinations, especially once you factor in the fact that you only use 3 of your 5 abilities. And so the potential pool of what you're dealing with is going to be different every single time. Combine that with the items over here, which you have a giant merchant stack full of items over here, and you're barely ever going to see most of those as you go through the game. I still have not seen most of these through playing the game. There's a lot of different items. You don't see a lot. They're very cool. They add an extra powers and abilities to the game state. And then combine that with the locations. The locations giving you small degrees, not as impactful, the locations, but they definitely give you some small nuance as far as what you go through. And then, of course, an entire pool of creatures to go through, both regular creatures and unhallowed, and the net result is you're playing with a puzzle of different things all meshing together to give you a unique experience, that puzzle to go through that is both fun and rewarding when you sit there and you have a turn where you activate an ability, you kill an enemy with a die, then you exhaust that ability to hit them again. You use the witch to manipulate the row and defeat the creature in that position, because some of these creatures have specific abilities that make them harder to deal with through just sheer power, and manipulation and abilities are a big part of the game state, and you will feel clever. You don't always want to exhaust your resources to try to equip new cards. More often than not, I try to make do with what I have as I play through the game, because I mean, if the entire game comes down to building the exact same build every single time, that gets a little boring. And so usually I play with the cards I have, but sometimes that particular card from the witch is going to be helpful and impactful to taking down these enemies, and so going to the campfire to equip it can be a big part of it. The campfire is a maintenance phase, but it's not a maintenance phase that feels like a waste of time. It's a maintenance phase that feels rewarding as you contribute to both your character's growth, your team's growth, and your general position of survivability in the field. The game gives you a challenge to go through. It's a manipulation puzzle. Yes, you're rolling dice. You're rolling dice and you're going to be dealing with the consequences of what you roll, but it can be incredibly satisfying to make do with what you have as you take down an entire row of baddies one step at a time while you try to survive the dark of the night. As far as what I don't like, I mentioned it already, setup is a pain. I do not like the setup of this game. It is, and again, it's one of those things that's weird. If I'm setting up a giant dungeon crawler, there's definitely more work that goes into that, but I think the experience I get out of that is also larger. This feels like a basic card game, small box, not a lot of components, and yet the setup is a little bit more obnoxious than I would like relative to what that is. And then secondly, I'd say the game can get a bit repetitive across those rounds of play. The game lasts 45 to 60 minutes, like I said already, but it feels like it could have been 15 minutes less while giving you that puzzle. You're going through a sequence of trying to take down enemies while utilizing your abilities and finding the combinations between the characters and abilities you have to ultimately win. That's the puzzle. The problem is that puzzle you're doing again and again and again and again and again across those 8 rounds of play, which feels a drop longer than it needs to be. I feel you could have halved it and it would have been fine. At most, you should have had 6 rounds, 4, and again, the balancing of, having 2 characters go to camp, I understand why it's being done the way it is, but structurally speaking, I feel it outstays its welcome a drop every single time I play it. I sit down to play it hoping for a 30 to 45 minute long experience and get a 45 to 60 minute long experience, which again, not the worst, but both setup and runtime of the game are a drop worse relative to the experience that I'm hoping for. As far as I can see, others not liking, first of all, walk into this game knowing that it thrives as a solo player game. This is not just my opinion. Whenever I have a personal opinion of a player count, I tend to check those up on BoardGameGeek as well to see, especially if I'm going to give you a cautionary thing, I want to make sure I'm saying it with not just one person's opinion behind it. This is generally received best as a solo experience. If you're going to buy this game for anything more than one player, I would caution you to understand that you're taking a risk or a gamble. This is rated best as a solo game, I think, and I've played this at more. I've played this at higher player counts, and I find that it feels, I don't know what it is necessarily. Maybe it's because you're sending characters to camp, and that means a dead turn. So it's a little bit like Zombicide in that sense, where controlling one character on its own is not satisfying. So once you go to 3, the controlling of the characters feels weird. At 4, controlling a character who's going to camp on its own just feels anticlimactic, and the decisions you make just don't feel rewarding enough. At a 2-player game, controlling 2 characters each, it does work, but I still vastly prefer it as a solo experience, and so just understand that. For me, I'm fine with that. I like solo puzzles, but understand what this game is before you get it. Make sure that's a fit for you as you go through it. I'll also say bad luck is 100% a thing in this game. Rolling handfuls of dice across 4 characters, these 4-sided dice are harder to pick up. Rolling handfuls of dice across 4 characters is actually a great roll. It's a 4, 4, and a 3 on a 4-sided die, which is absolutely phenomenal. I love that roll. But rolling handfuls of dice across the variety of characters and having them roll poorly is a kind of puzzle that I don't mind it. I like it in this game, and sometimes part of that puzzle is there. Part of the puzzle is, okay, great, that character rolled poorly. We're going to send them to the camp because we can manipulate or mitigate against the bad luck a little better that way. Alternatively, we're going to use their abilities a little bit more and it'll still work out. There's things you can do in the game that make managing your way through a bad die roll part of the experience, but you may not like that, and so take that into account as you get this. And then lastly, I'd say that the camp work phase can be busy work. Yes, there's rewarding aspects to it. Yes, there are things you're doing that are improving yourself, improving your posse, all things that are good, but at the end of the day, there's also busy work there, and especially if you're playing this at more than one player, having one of your characters go to camp feels like a slightly less efficient turn, and so that could be slightly frustrating. As far as final thoughts on Set a Watch, Sword of the Coin, I overall enjoy this puzzle. I like this universe. I played the original, I got rid of it, I got it back, I now got this one. I like the universe enough that I find myself constantly compelled by the puzzle. It's a great solo experience of defeating a row of enemies as you go through it, utilizing powers and abilities from a wide variety of characters that all feel like their own little challenge and puzzle to go through. It has a lot of things that I like in games: manipulation, powers, enemies, solo experience. All those are just fun little keywords that together give me a good puzzle. My biggest problem with it is that it does get a little repetitive across the rounds of play. It feels a little longer than what it should be for me, and again, that setup and teardown is not teardown. Well, teardown a little bit more setup than teardown. Those are things that slightly get in the way of my overall enjoyment of the puzzle. I still appreciate it, still enjoy it, but with nitpicks. For me, it's a 3.5 out of 5, an enjoyable experience with a lot to recommend, and some things that get in the way of just how good it could otherwise be for me. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Sky Tier Horde. Sky Tier Horde gives me a very similar feeling to this game, but in terms of that solo experience, but you can also play with more players. I think it does handle more players a little better, but still it's a game I find myself playing more often solo, but it has that same similar puzzle of a bunch of characters, well, not really characters, factions and cards and powers and abilities while you take down various enemies and try to manage that back and forth in the experience. So very similar in the feeling that they give me. And then secondly, very differently, but a little similar, Paperback Adventures. That's going to be another solo-based game as you go through a degree of deck building while you craft wards and take down enemies. Thematically very, very different, but in terms of if you're looking for an engaging solo puzzle, that is one that also does run longer than I would like it to run. Just for full transparency's sake, Paperback Adventures is a game that takes some time, but it can be a rewarding experience as you go through it. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.